The wind at Wintergard Keep did not blow. It bit. It tore through the courtyard, carrying the scent of frozen pine, wet mud, and the sharp metallic tang of rusted iron. Elara of House Vance stood perfectly still in the center of the slush. She wore a stiff, dark emerald woolen dress, completely devoid of the southern lace her sisters favored. It was practical, heavy, and yet entirely insufficient against the brutal northern winter. Her hands were numb, hidden entirely beneath the folds of her dark cloak to conceal their slight, involuntary trembling. But her posture was rigid. Her chin was held high. Around her, the courtyard was loud. Heavy wooden wagons groaned as southern soldiers unloaded crates onto the freezing mud. 300 crates of raw iron. That was the price. The great Alpha King of the North had demanded resources to stop raiding the southern borders. And Lord Vance, a man who viewed his children strictly as mathematical assets, had traded his eldest, forgotten daughter to seal the bargain. "Dump the cargo and let's get out of this frozen hell," the southern captain spat, rubbing his gloved hands together. He looked at Elara, his eyes lingering on her pale porcelain face with a mixture of pity and profound disrespect. "Enjoy the beasts, my lady. Try not to scream too loudly when they eat you." From the shadows of the stone archways, massive men with heavy brows and predatory eyes watched her. The wolves of Wintergard. They did not bow. They did not offer her a warm hearth. A towering man with a scarred jaw stepped forward from the pack. This was Beta Thorn. He looked her up and down, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "Skin and bones," Thorn sneered, his voice a guttural rasp. "The Southern Lord insults us. We asked for a treaty, and he sends us a useless piece of human flesh. She won't survive the first blizzard, let alone a royal bed." The pack laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the high stone walls. Elara did not flinch. She did not lower her eyes. She merely tightened her grip on the only object she had brought from her father's house, a heavy, leather-bound ledger. A faint stain of silver ink marked her right index finger, the permanent brand of a woman who spent her life managing the logistics her father was too incompetent to handle. Suddenly, the laughter died. The heavy iron gates at the far end of the courtyard groaned open. The suffocating silence fell over the pack. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. King Kaelin walked in. He did not ride a majestic steed, nor did he wear a crown of gold. The Alpha King of the Winter Fangs wore battered, boiled leather and a massive, snow-dusted dire bear pelt draped over his broad shoulders. He looked exhausted. A fresh smear of blood streaked across his strong, square jaw, and he carried a chipped iron broadsword loosely in his right hand. He was a giant of a man, lean from a brutal winter, radiating an immovable, cold authority. Kaelin stopped in the center of the mud, his piercing, steel-gray eyes sweeping over the southern soldiers, causing them to instinctively step back in terror. He had just spent 3 days hunting rogues in the deep snow. He was tired. His bones ached. He fully expected to return to his keep and find a weeping, terrified southern princess fainting at the sight of his blood. His steely gaze finally landed on Elara. She stood barely a few feet away, her emerald dress stained with mud at the hem. She was fragile, pale, and entirely silent. But as Kaelin looked at her, his wolf, normally aggressive and restless, suddenly paused in his chest. There was no scent of terror rolling off her. There was only the faint, crisp scent of crushed mint and frozen pine, steady and grounded. "Is the treaty signed?" Kalen's voice was a low, exhausted rumble that vibrated through the stones beneath their feet. "Yes, Your Grace," the southern captain stammered, pulling a heavy rolled parchment from his belt. 300 crates of iron, delivered as promised. The girl is yours. Kalen didn't look at the contract. He handed his chipped sword to a guard and turned toward the keep, ready to sleep for a week. "Put the iron in the armory. Take the girl to the southern chambers. Give her a fire." "Wait!" The single word cut through the freezing air. It wasn't a shout. It was quiet, clear, and absolutely commanding. Kalen stopped. He turned slowly, his heavy brow ridge furrowing. No one commanded the Alpha King. No one. Elara stepped forward, her leather boots crunched in the icy mud. She ignored the warning growls of the wolves around her. She ignored the sheer, terrifying mass of the king standing before her. Instead, she flipped open her heavy ledger. "You do not have 300 crates of iron, Your Grace," Elara said, her voice perfectly level. She looked down at a column of silver ink, then up at Kalen's face. "You have 298. The courtyard went dead silent. Beta Thorn stepped forward, baring his teeth. "Hold your tongue, human. Do not speak to the king." "The wagons sent by my father were loaded with standard 50-pound crates," Elara continued smoothly, talking right over the snarling Beta. She pointed a slender, ink-stained finger at the last wagon. His suspension on that rear axle is sitting nearly 3 inches higher than the others. Furthermore, the draft horses pulling it are not sweating at the shoulders, indicating a significantly lighter load. The final 2 crates in that stack are hollow wooden boxes filled with river stones. She slowly turned her dark hazel eyes to the southern captain. The man had gone entirely pale, his jaw slacking in horror. "My father is a miser," Elara said coldly. "But he is a coward. He would not risk the Alpha King's wrath over 2 crates of iron. Which means you, Captain, sold them at the border town for drinking coin, assuming these beasts would not know how to count." The captain drew his sword in a panic. "You lying little!" A deafening, chest-shaking roar erupted from Kalen. The Alpha King didn't draw a weapon. He simply took 1 step forward. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of his aura slammed into the captain like a physical blow, driving the man to his knees in the mud. The sword slipped from his trembling fingers. Kalen looked at the terrified captain, then down at the fragile, perfectly composed woman holding the silver-inked ledger. She had not stepped back when he roared. She hadn't even blinked. For the first time in months, a tiny, genuine spark of interest flared in Kalen's exhausted steel-gray eyes. His wolf did not want to tear her apart. His wolf was utterly fascinated. "Check the crates," Kalen commanded in a low rumble. 2 wolves shattered the wooden boxes on the last wagon. River stones spilled into the mud. The pack erupted into angry snarls, circling the southern guards. But Kalen simply raised 1 large, calloused hand, demanding absolute silence. He looked down at Elara. She was still holding her ledger, waiting. "You sold your own guards out, little bird," Kalen murmured, leaning down slightly. "They will beat you for that when they report back to your father." "They're not going back," Elara replied flatly, closing her ledger with a definitive snap. "They stole from the Winterfangs. Pack law states thieves forfeit their boots and their mounts. They can walk back to the southern border barefoot. If the winter doesn't kill them, their incompetence will." Kalen stared at her. The brutal, tactical ruthlessness of her words stood in stark contrast to her delicate face. A woman's intelligence was indeed a weapon, and she wielded hers like an executioner's blade. The corners of Kaelin's scarred mouth twitched upward in a rare, microscopic movement. "Strip their boots. Throw them out the gates," Kaelin ordered, not breaking eye contact with Elara. He gestured toward the massive oak doors of the keep. "Come inside, Elara of House Vance. You are freezing." Elara offered a single stiff nod and walked past him, her head held high. Kaelin followed, his massive frame shielding her from the biting wind. But as the heavy doors closed behind them, Beta Thorn stood in the mud, his eyes glowing a sickly, violent yellow. The human was supposed to be a victim, a weak link to break the king's focus. Instead, she was calculating. And in Wintergard, a calculating mind was far more dangerous than sharp teeth. Morning in Wintergard did not bring warmth. It only turned the pitch-black sky into a bruised, freezing gray. Elara had not slept. She sat at the small wooden desk in her drafty chamber, her stiff emerald woolen dress wrapped tightly around her. The fire in the hearth was pitiful, barely a handful of damp logs sputtering against the cold. She had spent the night doing what she did best, observing. She had counted the patrols passing beneath her window, timed the changing of the guards, and noted the alarmingly thin smoke rising from the kitchen chimneys. Wintergard was a fortress built for war, but it was currently losing a battle against starvation. When a servant finally escorted her down to the great hall to break her fast, the air was thick with tension. The hall was cavernous, built from black stone and lined with the banners of the Winter Fangs. Long wooden tables were crowded with massive, scarred warriors. Yet for a pack of apex predators, their plates were remarkably bare. King Kaelin sat at the high table. He wore a fresh linen tunic under his boiled leather, though the dark circles under his steel-gray eyes remained. He looked less like a king and more like a general holding up a crumbling shield wall. Elara took her seat at the end of the high table, her silver-inked ledger resting quietly on her lap. She kept her hands folded over it, hiding the slight tremor in her fingers caused by the biting cold of the hall. Beta Thorn sat halfway down the room, tearing into a meager piece of roasted fowl. He threw the bones onto the floor, wiping his grease-stained mouth, before turning his predatory gaze toward the high table. He had not forgotten the humiliation in the courtyard. "Is this how Southern nobility eats?" Thorn's voice boomed across the silent hall, dripping with malice. He grabbed a wooden trencher holding a small, tough slab of gristle and slid it violently down the table until it hit Elara's plate with a loud clatter. "Eat up, human. We barely have enough to feed our warriors. A waste of winter rations like you should be grateful for the scraps." A few of the younger wolves snickered. The older veterans simply watched, waiting to see if the king's new bride would break. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He set his iron goblet down with a heavy thud, preparing to silence his beta. He did not tolerate indiscipline in his ranks. But Elara spoke first. "I am grateful for the hospitality, Beta Thorn," Elara said. Her voice was not loud, but its clear, carrying pitch cut through the low murmurs of the hall perfectly. She did not look at the gristle. She opened her ledger, smoothing the parchment with her ink-stained finger. "However, I am curious as to why the pack is fighting over scraps in the first place." Thorn scowled, standing up from his bench. "Because winter is harsh, you arrogant little. Because your logistics are entirely fabricated. Elara interrupted, her tone as cold as the frost on the windows. She looked up, her dark hazel eyes locking on to Thorn. I watched the supply carts unload this morning. According to standard winter preservation ratios, a pack of this size requires roughly 200 pounds of salted mutton a week. Yet, based on the physical depth of the cart beds and the minimal effort of the draft horses pulling them to the kitchens, you brought in less than 140 pounds. The snickering stopped entirely. That is a 30% deficit, Elara continued, her posture rigid, her voice devoid of fear. Your men are starving not because winter is harsh, but because a third of your meat supply is vanishing between the smokehouse and the Great Hall. So, if I am a waste of rations, Beta Thorn, what do you call the man who is quietly bleeding his own pack dry? Thorn's face flushed dark red. The yellow hue of his wolf flared in his eyes. A low, guttural snarl vibrated in his chest as his pride was shredded in front of 100 warriors by a fragile human girl. You dare call me a thief? Thorn roared. He lunged forward, his heavy boots slamming against the stone floor as he closed the distance toward the high table, his hands curling into claws. Before Thorn could take another step, the temperature in the room plummeted. A suffocating, crushing pressure slammed down on the entire hall. The younger wolves choked on their breath. The veterans lowered their heads instinctively. Kalen stood up. He didn't draw his chipped broadsword. He simply moved with terrifying speed, stepping squarely between Thorn and Elara. The Alpha King's aura was an ocean of pure, unadulterated dominance. It pressed against the stone walls, heavy and absolute. Take one more step toward my queen, Thorn, Kalen rumbled, his voice dropping into a deadly vibrating register. And I will sever your hands. Thorn froze. He was a massive, lethal warrior, but under Kalen's shadow, he looked like a pup. The beta lowered his eyes, his chest heaving as he forced his wolf into submission. She insults my honor, your grace. She read a cart, Kalen corrected coldly. If the numbers insult you, fix the numbers. Sit down. Thorn shot a venomous glare at Elara, but he turned and stalked out of the great hall, unable to bear the public humiliation. Kalen remained standing for a long moment, making sure no other wolf in the room dared to challenge the silence. Slowly, but he turned his head to look over his shoulder at Elara. He expected her to be pale, hyperventilating, or crying in terror after nearly being mauled by a fully grown werewolf. Instead, she was looking down at her ledger, calmly noting a new column in silver ink. Her hands, resting under the table, were trembling. He could hear the faint rustle of her woolen dress, but her heart rate was incredibly, terrifyingly steady. And then, the scent hit him. For the first time since she arrived, Kalen's exhausted, war-torn wolf did not smell the scent of a frightened stranger. Beneath the smell of parchment and cold wool, a crisp, grounding scent flooded his senses. Crushed mint and frozen pine. It was clean. It was logical. It was an anchor. His beast, which had been pacing in agitation for months under the stress of a dying kingdom, instantly settled into a profound, quiet calm. Kalen's breath hitched slightly. Humans did not have mate sense. It was impossible. Yet the scent was undeniably hers, awakened by the sheer force of her unyielding resolve. Kalen stepped back, turning to fully face her. Elara looked up, meeting his steel-gray eyes. Your keep is bleeding to death from the inside, Your Grace, she said softly, ensuring only he could hear. You rule by the sword, But a sword cannot balance a ledger, and it cannot feed a starving army. She closed her book. Give me the ledgers. All of them. Give me the inventory logs, the trade manifests, and the armory counts. Kaelin stared down at the small, fragile woman, holding her silver-inked book like a shield. His pack respected violence, and he was exhausted from providing it. But here sat a human who commanded a room using nothing but ink and absolute fearlessness. Slowly, Kaelin reached down to his thick leather belt. He unclipped a heavy iron ring holding a dozen massive iron keys, the keys to the grain stores, the armory, the smokehouses, and the royal treasury. He dropped the heavy ring directly onto her ledger. It landed with a definitive ringing clank. The keep is yours, Elara, Kaelin murmured, his voice rich with a respect he had never offered a soul. Find the rot, and I will cut it out. For 3 days and 3 nights, Elara practically lived in the king's map room. It was a circular stone chamber located high in the central tower, filled with the scent of burning pine logs and melting beeswax. Heavy vellum maps covered the grand oak table in the center, weighed down by iron daggers. But Elara ignored the maps. Her focus was entirely on the towering stack of moldering logbooks she had confiscated using Kaelin's iron keys. She worked with absolute mechanical precision. Her silver-inked ledger sat open before her, absorbing the chaotic, fabricated numbers of Wintergard and reorganizing them into cold, undeniable truths. The hem of her emerald dress was still stained with dried mud, and her right index finger was perpetually black with silver ink. But she did not stop to rest. King Kaelin did not leave her unguarded. He sat by the hearth in the corner of the room, rhythmically running a whetstone down the edge of his chipped iron broadsword. He watched her. The Alpha King of the Winterfangs, a man who commanded an army of massive beasts, found himself entirely mesmerized by the scratching sound of a human's quill. You haven't eaten. Kaelin's low rumble broke the silence of the room. Elara did not look up. I ate a portion of oats at dawn, Your Grace. It was sufficient. It was a handful of dust, Kaelin corrected, setting his whetstone down. You are running my keep. If you collapse, Thorn takes the keys back. Eat. He stood, grabbing a wooden plate holding a thick slice of salted venison and warm bread from the side table, and walked over to her. He set it down directly on top of a false inventory log she was reading. Elara finally paused. She looked at the meat, then up at his massive, scarred face. His steel gray eyes held no pity, only a gruff, practical demand. She offered a stiff nod, picking up the bread. Dorn is not just a thief, Elara said quietly, taking a small bite. She chewed meticulously, swallowing before she spoke again. He is a merchant. Kaelin's expression darkened. He leaned his heavy hands on the edge of the oak table, bringing his face closer to hers. Explain. Elara wiped her ink-stained fingers on a rag and pulled her ledger forward. The missing 30% of the mutton was just a symptom. I tracked the grain reserves, the winter pelts, and the armory logs. Over the past 4 months, Wintergard has lost 80 crates of arrows, 50 iron shields, and enough salted pork to feed a battalion. Thorn wrote them off as lost to rot or rogue attacks. She dragged her finger across a jagged line drawn on the map of the surrounding mountains. But the supply wagons assigned to those specific lost deliveries always passed through the Black Ridge Gorge, she continued, her hazel eyes locking onto his. It is a narrow pass leading directly to the southern border. Your beta is smuggling your winter survival supplies out of the keep and selling them to the southern mercenaries camped beyond the mountains. A deadly silence filled the map room. Kalen stared at the map, his jaw locked so tightly the scarred muscles feathered under his skin. Treason. Betrayal from his own second-in-command while the pack starved. A low, violent growl began to vibrate in Kalen's chest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as the Alpha's beast surged forward, demanding blood. Elara felt the shift. The sheer predatory weight of his anger was terrifying. Her wreath hitched slightly, and beneath the heavy oak table, her hands began to tremble. The cold drafts of the room, combined with the sheer exhaustion of her work and the terrifying proximity of a raging werewolf, finally cracked her rigid composure. Her shoulders shivered. Kalen stopped. The growl died in his throat. He looked down, his sharp eyes catching the subtle tremor running through her fragile frame. She was terrified, freezing, and exhausted. Yet she had not taken a single step back from him. She had stood her ground to hand him the truth. The Alpha King moved, not with violence, but with a slow, deliberate grace that belied his massive size. He unclasped the heavy iron brooches at his shoulders and pulled off his massive dire-bear pelt cloak. Elara stiffened as Kalen stepped behind her chair, but he did not touch her skin. He gently draped the massive, incredibly warm pelt over her shoulders. It dwarfed her entirely, smelling of wood smoke, leather, and him. The oppressive weight of the fur instantly chased away the biting cold of the room. "You are shivering, Elara," Kalen murmured. His voice was no longer a general's bark. It was a rough, quiet timbre that brushed against her ear. He rested his large, calloused hands lightly on the back of her wooden chair. He did not crowd her, but he stayed close enough that she could feel the furnace-like heat radiating from his chest. As the warmth seeped into her bones, Elara's trembling ceased. Her rigid posture softened just a fraction. She let out a slow, steady breath. And as her human heart settled into a calm, steady rhythm, Kalen closed his eyes. There it was again, the crisp, clean scent of crushed mint and frozen pine rising from her skin. It wrapped around his raging wolf, instantly soothing the beast. His anger at Thorn evaporated into sharp, calculated focus. Her intellect was the weapon. His strength was merely the shield that protected it. "When is the next drop?" Kalen asked, opening his eyes, his voice completely steady. Elara looked back down at the ledger, pulling the heavy cloak tighter around herself. "Tonight. The logs show 3 wagons of grain are scheduled to be transported to the eastern watchtower, but the draft horses assigned to them are shod for mountain ice. They are heading to the Black Ridge Gorge." Kalen straightened up. He picked up his chipped broadsword from the hearth. "I will take my personal guard. We intercept the wagons at the gorge. I will bring back the grain, and I will bring back Thorn's head." Elara turned in her chair, watching him strap the sword to his back. "Do not underestimate him, Your Grace. A cornered rat fights with poison, not teeth." Kalen paused at the heavy oak door. He looked back at her, wrapped in his pelt, her dark hair glowing in the firelight. "I am the king of the winter fangs, Elara. I do not fear rats." He gave her a single, firm nod and stepped out into the corridor. Elara watched the door close. The room felt strangely empty without his immense presence. She turned back to the table, her mind buzzing with the logistics of the impending confrontation. She pulled the Southern Guard rotation logs, documents she had smuggled in from her father's captain, and began cross-referencing the dates with Thorn's drops. Suddenly, her ink-stained finger stopped. The Southern mercenaries weren't just buying stolen goods. The volume of weapons Thorn had smuggled out over the past month was enough to arm 500 men. And the Black Ridge Gorge wasn't just a trade route. It was a topographical choke point. Elara's blood ran cold. The trembling returned, violently this time. Thorn wasn't going to the gorge to trade tonight. He was leading the Alpha King directly into a heavily armed Southern ambush. She shot up from her chair, the heavy bear pelt slipping from her shoulders, and ran toward the door. But as she gripped the iron handle, she heard the heavy thud of the courtyard gates slamming shut outside. Kalen had already ridden out into the blizzard, and he was riding straight into a trap. The thud of heavy boots on stone echoed through the corridor, a sound of desperate urgency. Elara was already at the main gates when the hunting party stumbled into the keep. They were dragging a massive, limp weight between them. Kalen, his tunic, was shredded, his ribs blackened by jagged, burned flesh, the trademark sign of silver-laced traps. The courtyard erupted in a cacophony of snarls and panicked howls. Beta Thorn was the first to reach them, his eyes flashing with a predatory, opportunistic glee rather than concern. "The Alpha is dying," Thorn roared, his voice echoing off the walls, clearly meant to incite the pack. "This is the work of the human spy. She knew the ambush route. She mapped the gorge. She sold our king to her southern kin." A wave of feral anger surged through the pack. Warriors began to shift, their eyes glowing with uncontrolled, bloodthirsty hunger. They turned toward Elara, who stood at the edge of the stone steps, her face pale but her expression composed. "Silence!" The command didn't come from a warrior. It came from Elara. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a whip. She walked down the steps, ignoring the bristling wolves, and knelt beside Kalen's ruined body. She felt the heat radiating from him, an unnatural, searing heat that spoke of poison. "Bring him to the high tower," she commanded, her voice turning to ice. "Thorn, if you are a beta of this pack, prove it by gathering the strongest wolves to guard the keep. If you are a traitor, keep screaming and prove you are a dog." Thorn opened his mouth to retort, but the sheer, icy authority in her eyes halted him. He snarled, but he stepped back, sensing the shift in the pack. His mood. They were confused, but her command had given them a direction. Inside the high tower, the room was a whirlwind of frantic healers. Kalen was thrashing on the bed, his wolf fighting the silver poisoning, his claws scraping deep gouges into the heavy oak of the bed frame. "He is burning up," the head healer stammered, his hands shaking. "The silver has entered his bloodstream. We cannot cut it all out without killing him." Elara shoved the man aside, her movements sharp and efficient. She grabbed a basin of ice-cold water and a clean, sharp scalpel. "He is burning because his wolf is fighting the poison. If you cannot cut it out, we must draw it out. Heat the iron tongs. Prepare the poultice of mountain ash. Now!" For the next 6 hours, the high tower became a fortress of pain. Elara did not leave his side. She wiped the sweat from his brow, her own hands raw and shaking from the physical toll of holding him down while the healers worked. Every time his wolf threatened to take over, every time his amber eyes flashed with feral, killing intent, Elara placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice a grounding, steady anchor amidst his agony. "Breathe. You are the King of Wintergard. You do not die in a bed.
Understood.
His breathing would hitch, his massive chest heaving against her touch, and then, miraculously, the scent of crushed mint and frozen pine would flood his senses. His wolf would settle. But outside the door, the situation was deteriorating. Thorn had returned. He had gathered 20 wolves, all loyal to his ambition. The sound of their boots against the corridor floor was heavy and deliberate. They were coming to finish the coup. "The king is weak," Thorn's voice filtered through the heavy oak door. "And the human bride is a traitor. Break the door. Take the throne." The healer went pale, dropping his tools. "We are trapped. We have no soldiers in here." Elara stood up. She grabbed the heavy iron keyring Kaelin had given her. She did not look at the door. She looked at the king, whose breathing was finally leveling out. She turned to the healers. "You, barricade the door with the armory crates. You, keep the fire hot. If he wakes, he will need to drink." She walked to the massive oak door and slammed the bolt home, just as the first heavy thud of a shoulder hit the other side. "Elara." A rough, broken rasp filled the room. She spun around. Kaelin was awake. He was gaunt, his face ashen, and he was drenched in sweat, but his eyes were clear. He tried to sit up, but his ribs groaned under the effort. "Thorn," he croaked, his gaze darting to the door that was currently splintering under Thorn's siege. He thinks I am dead." "He thinks you are weak," Elara corrected. She stepped to the bed, her shadow falling over him. She was covered in his blood, her emerald dress ruined, her hair disheveled, but she had never looked more like a queen. "He is breaking the door, Kaelin," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "I have the ledger. I have the keys. I have saved your life, but I cannot hold that door much longer." Kaelin gripped the side of the bed, his knuckles white. He looked at the door, then up at the woman who had not fled, who had not begged, who had held his pack together while he bled. "Then let him in," Kaelin growled, his voice strengthening with every passing second, his wolf rising to meet the threat at the door. "Let him see that the king is alive." The heavy iron hinges of the high tower door groaned as Beta Thorn's men rammed a heavy wooden beam against it. The wood began to splinter, cracking under the brute force of 20 ambitious wolves. Inside, the room was thick with the scent of mountain ash, sweat, and Elara's dried blood on her ruined emerald dress. She stood rigid near the foot of the bed, her hands gripping her silver-inked ledger so tightly her knuckles were white. With a final, deafening crack, the door's lock shattered. Thorn burst into the room, his chest heaving, his amber eyes burning with the thrill of an easy coup. Behind him, his loyalists filed in, baring their teeth, ready to claim the keep from a dying king and a helpless human bride. "The king is dead," Thorn announced, raising his hands. "The human has poisoned him." "I am breathing, Thorn." The voice was a low, guttural rasp that seemed to vibrate up through the stone floorboards. Thorn froze. The triumphant sneer on his face dissolved into pure, unadulterated shock. King Kaelin pushed himself out of the shadows near the hearth. He was not lying on his deathbed. Though he leaned heavily against his chipped broadsword, his massive frame towered over the room. His chest was wrapped in white linen, spotted with fresh blood, but his steel-gray eyes were ablaze with a terrifying, cold fury. The 20 wolves behind Thorn instantly dropped their gazes, whining softly, their instincts warring against their treason as the true Alpha's aura flooded the chamber. "You seem disappointed, Beta," Kaelin rumbled, taking a slow, agonizing step forward. Thorn swallowed hard, taking a step back.
Your Grace, we heard the human had turned on you. We came to secure the tower.
You came to secure a crown, Kaelin corrected softly. He did not raise his sword. He didn't need to. He looked at Elara, offering her a single, definitive nod.
Walk with me, Elara. It is time to address the pack.
The march from the high tower to the great hall was slow, tense, and absolute. Kaelin refused the help of the healers. He walked under his own power, the very picture of an unkillable warlord. Elara walked closely by his side, her chin held high, the heavy dire bear pelt still draped over her shoulders. She looked like a true Luna, carrying the weight of the keep in the ledger pressed against her chest. When they entered the great hall, a hushed, terrified silence fell over the hundreds of wolves gathered there. They parted like a sea, making a wide path for their bleeding king and his human bride. Kaelin walked straight to the high table. He did not sit. He turned to face his pack, his gaze sweeping over the warriors, the elders, and finally landing on Beta Thorn, who had been forced to stand in the center of the room. For 3 years, Kaelin began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. We have starved. We have frozen. We have bled on the borders, fighting rogues and mercenaries, believing the harshness of the North was our only enemy. He looked down at his own bandaged chest. I led you with claws and teeth. I believed that strength alone would preserve us. I was blind. The pack remained dead silent, stunned by the confession of their proud, unyielding king. I was blind to the rot within my own walls, Kaelin continued, his voice hardening into steel. He gestured to Elara. It took a human, traded to us for 300 crates of iron, to see what my eyes missed. Speak, Elara. Elara stepped forward. She did not shrink under the stares of 100 predators. She opened her silver-inked ledger. Beta Thorn has accused me of treason, Elara said, her clear, calm voice carrying perfectly across the hall. But numbers do not lie, and they do not hold loyalties. She looked directly at Thorn, who was sweating profusely. 4 weeks ago, Elara read from the ledger, Beta Thorn ordered the exchange of 200 premium winter wolf pelts with southern merchants. The log states he received 300 pounds of rock salt in return. She closed the ledger, holding Thorn's panicked gaze. Rock salt is heavy, but it is cheap. The market exchange rate for premium northern pelts would yield over 2,000 pounds of salt, not 300. The only commodity from the south that matches the exact weight-to-value ratio of that trade. She paused, letting the silence stretch, thick and heavy. Is refined silver, Elara finished coldly. Thorn did not buy salt to preserve our meat. He bought the silver used to line the traps in the Blackridge Gorge. He bought the weapon meant to kill your king. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The elders whispered furiously. The warriors glared at Thorn, their eyes flashing yellow. Lies! Thorn roared, pointing a trembling finger at Elara. She is a southern witch. She writes false numbers to divide us. The ambush was set by her father's men. The ambush was executed by southern mercenaries, yes, Elara countered smoothly, unbothered by his shouting. Mercenaries you paid with the grain you stole from this very keep. You starved your own people to fund a coup. Kaelin stepped forward, his immense presence utterly crushing Thorn's remaining defiance. I am an alpha of war.
Kalen said to his pack, his voice ringing with absolute authority. But a king without a mind is just a beast waiting to be slaughtered. Elara of House Vance did not betray this pack. She saved it. She mapped the rot. She exposed the traitor. And she pulled the poison from my chest while you cowards tried to break down my door. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently grasping Elara's ink-stained fingers, raising her hand for the pack to see. She is not a hostage, Kalen declared, his steel-gray eyes blazing. She is the mind of Wintergard. She is my equal. And anyone who questions her authority questions mine. Thorn fell to his knees, realizing he had lost the pack entirely. The warriors who had followed him into the tower now turned their backs on him, growling in disgust. Kalen had established accountability, admitting his own flaws, and in doing so, he had cemented Elara's place not just as a bride, but as the true, undisputed queen. But before Kalen could pass the final sentence on Thorn, a sound shattered the heavy atmosphere of the great hall. It was a horn. A long, jagged, deafening blast that echoed off the mountains and shook the stone walls of the keep. The pack froze. That was not the horn of a returning patrol. That was the siege horn. A scout burst through the heavy oak doors, his chest heaving, his face pale with terror. "Your Grace!" the scout shouted, dropping to one knee. "An army! Southern banners! It's Lord Vance. He has brought 500 armored mercenaries, and they are marching on the gates." The blast of the siege horn still echoed in the rafters of the great hall when chaos erupted. The immediate threat of Beta Thorn was instantly eclipsed by the shadow of war. Kalen did not hesitate. His alpha authority, honed over years of brutal command, took over. "Strip Thorn of his rank," Kalen barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Lock him in the deep dungeons using the very silver chains he purchased. He will face the moon's judgment when the sun rises. Move!" Two veteran warriors grabbed the disgraced Beta, dragging him away. Thorn did not fight. The sheer terror of the invading army and the crushing weight of Kalen's survival had broken his spirit entirely. Kalen turned to his pack. "Barricade the gates, man the walls, archers to the high towers." The wolves scattered, moving with disciplined, frantic energy. Kalen gripped his chipped broadsword, his knuckles white. The white linen wrapped around his chest was already blossoming with fresh crimson from the exertion, his breath coming in shallow, painful bursts. He turned to Elara. She was still standing by the high table, the silver-inked ledger clutched to her chest. "Vance believes I am dead," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a rough, private register as he closed the distance between them. "He thinks the keep is leaderless and divided. He has come to take his iron back, and he has come to take you, to sell you to the next highest bidder." Elara looked up at him. Her face was pale, but her dark hazel eyes were steady. "He brought 500 armored men, Kalen. Your warriors are starving, and you are bleeding. You cannot meet them on an open field." "I am the king of the winter fangs," Kalen rumbled, his steel-gray eyes softening for a fraction of a second as he looked at her. He reached out, his massive, warm hand gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. It was the most intimate gesture he had ever offered. "I protect what is mine. You will go to the deep vaults. No matter what happens at the gates, I will not let them touch you." He turned to leave, fully prepared to march out into the freezing blizzard and die defending the walls. "Stop!" Elara's voice was not a shout, but it possessed an icy, immovable authority that made Kalen freeze in his tracks. He turned back, his heavy brow furrowed in confusion. She did not walk toward the vaults. She walked straight toward him, stopping only inches from his chest. She looked up, her expression a mask of absolute, terrifying calculation. Yo.
You rule by the sword, Kaelin, Elara said softly. But I told you, a sword cannot feed an army. And today, a sword will not save one. I will not be a widow before I am truly a wife, and I will not let you throw your life away from my father's greed. Kaelin stared at her, mesmerized by the fierce, unwavering light in her eyes. The scent of crushed mint and pine washed over him, grounding his panicked wolf. Elara, they have siege ladders and heavy steel. We are outnumbered 5 to 1. They have nothing, Elara corrected coldly. She opened her silver-inked ledger and turned to the final page. When I took control of your trade logs 3 days ago, I did not just audit Thorn's theft. I noticed my father's supply lines on the southern maps. She traced a finger over a column of dates. My father is an arrogant man, but he is a creature of habit. He relies on the southern trade guilds for grain while marching through the mountains. 3 days ago, using the seal on my marriage contract, I sent ravens to the southern outposts. I forged new trade orders, claiming the Black Ridge Gorge was collapsed by avalanches. Kaelin's eyes widened slightly as the gravity of her words began to settle in. I rerouted all of his supply wagons to the eastern swamps. Elara continued, her voice devoid of pity. My father's army has been marching through a brutal northern blizzard for 3 days, with absolutely zero food ration. Furthermore, he outfitted his mercenaries in heavy southern steel plate to intimidate you. She looked up, a ruthless, brilliant tactician standing in the shell of a fragile human girl. Steel armor conducts the cold, Kaelin, she whispered. By now, their hands are frostbitten to their hilts. Their horses are starving, and their men are exhausted. They are not a siege army. They are a frozen, broken mob waiting to die. Silence stretched between them, heavy and profound. Kaelin looked down at the ledger, then at the woman holding it. He had spent his entire life fighting, bleeding, and losing men to secure his borders. In 3 days, armed with nothing but ink and a brilliant mind, this traded bride had completely dismantled an entire invading force. A low, rich chuckle rumbled deep in Kaelin's chest. It was a sound of pure awe. His wolf did not just respect her. It bowed completely to her intellect. By the moon, Kaelin breathed, a reverent smile touching his scarred lips. You broke a siege before they even saw our walls. We do not need to fight them, Elara said, closing the book with a sharp snap. We just need to let the winter do its work. Tell your men to stand down the archers. We are going to open the gates. Kaelin didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He simply nodded. Saddle the horses, he roared to the guards near the doors. The queen has given her command. 10 minutes later, the bitter wind howled through the courtyard. Elara sat atop a calm gray mare, her dark emerald dress hidden beneath the massive dire bear pelt Kaelin had given her. She sat perfectly straight, her hands steady on the reins. Beside her, mounted on a massive black destrier, was King Kaelin. He wore no armor over his bandaged chest, refusing to hide the fact that he had survived. He looked like a towering monument of war, his steel-gray eyes fixed forward, entirely ready to destroy anything that threatened the woman beside him. The heavy iron wheels of the keep's gates began to turn, groaning against the ice. Beyond the threshold, standing in the driving snow, was Lord Vance and his 500 mercenaries. They looked exactly as Elara had predicted, shivering,
pale, their steel armor frosted over, their horses stamping weakly in the deep drifts. As the gates swung open, revealing the Alpha King alive and the human daughter sitting beside him like a goddess of winter, the enemy lines faltered. Elara nudged her mare forward, riding out of the protective shadow of the keep and into the open snow. Kaelin shadowed her flank, a silent, lethal guardian. It was time to balance the final ledger. The biting wind howled through the open gates of Wintergard, swirling snow around the hooves of Elara's gray mare. 50 yards away, the southern army stood frozen in the white wasteland. Lord Vance sat atop his armored warhorse, wrapped in heavy velvet cloaks that were stiff with frost. His face, usually a mask of arrogant southern nobility, was pale and slack with shock. He looked at the massive, unkillable Alpha King sitting upon the black destrier, and then his eyes shifted to the woman beside him. "Elara?" Lord Vance breathed, his voice barely carrying over the wind. He blinked, unable to comprehend the sight before him. The scouts. The scouts swore the beast was dying. They said the pack was eating itself. "Your scouts spoke to a traitor who is currently locked in our dungeons," Elara replied. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed an icy, carrying clarity that reached the shivering mercenary standing behind her father. She nudged her mare forward, closing the distance until she was a mere 20 yards from the southern line. Kaelin's destrier moved in perfect, terrifying synchronization with hers, stopping exactly at her right flank. "You look cold, father," Elara noted, her dark hazel eyes sweeping over the miserable, frostbitten army. "And hungry. I imagine a 3-day march through a blizzard without supply wagons is taxing." Lord Vance's eyes widened. "The avalanches, the rerouted grain." He stared at his daughter, the horrifying realization dawning on him. "That was you? You trapped your own blood in this wasteland?" "I secured my borders," Elara corrected coldly. "You traded me to the Winter Fangs for 300 crates of iron, assuming I would die and your treaty would dissolve. You marched an army here to scavenge the remains of this keep." She pulled a heavy rolled parchment from her saddlebag. It wasn't just a letter. It was a page carefully extracted from her silver-inked ledger. She tossed it onto the snow. "That is a new treaty," Elara commanded, her posture rigid, her aura entirely royal. "House Vance forfeits all trade rights through the Blackridge Gorge. You will pay a reparation tax of 10,000 gold pieces to Wintergard for this act of war. And you will leave your heavy steel armor, your weapons, and your wagons at our gates." Lord Vance flushed with rage, his hand dropping to the hilt of his frozen sword. "You insolent little girl! You think you can dictate terms to me? We have 500 swords. I will drag you back south by your hair and mount the beast's head on my wall." Beside Elara, Kaelin did not draw his chipped broadsword. He simply let his beast rise to the surface. A deafening, earth-shaking roar erupted from the Alpha King's chest. The sound was so violent, so full of ancient, lethal promise, that Lord Vance's horse reared in sheer terror, throwing the older man unceremoniously into the deep snow. The mercenaries behind him flinched, instinctively stepping backward. Their hands were too numb to draw their weapons, their bodies too starved to fight the towering predators that were now emerging from the gates of Wintergard, forming a massive, silent wall of fangs and muscle behind their king and queen. Elara did not even blink at Kaelin's roar. She simply looked down at her father, who was scrambling to his knees in the freezing slush. "You have 500 starving men who cannot feel their fingers, father," Elara said softly, her absolute calm more terrifying than the Alpha's rage. If you do not sign that ledger page right now, my husband will kill you, and I will not look away.
Lord Vance looked at the towering, wrathful King of Wintergard. He looked at the silent, hungry wolves waiting for a single command. And finally, he looked at the daughter he had thrown away like garbage, whose eyes held absolutely no mercy. Trembling violently, Lord Vance pulled a charcoal stub from his pouch. He crawled forward in the snow and signed the parchment. Leave the armor. Leave the weapons. Walk home, Elara ordered, turning her gray mare around. If any of your men are found on Wintergard lands by sunset, the wolves will feed. She rode back toward the gates. Kaelin turned his black destrier, his massive frame shielding her back, until they passed beneath the heavy iron archway. The gates groaned shut, sealing the freezing winter and the defeated army outside. Inside the courtyard, a heavy, profound silence hung in the air. The warriors of Wintergard stood in the snow. They had braced themselves for a bloodbath. They had expected to die today to protect their keep. Instead, they had watched a fragile human woman dismantle an invading army, using nothing but intellect and a silver-inked book. Slowly, an older warrior near the front stepped forward. He did not cheer. He simply dropped to one knee, bowing his head. Another wolf followed. Then another. Within seconds, the entire pack of the Winter Fangs was kneeling in the slush, offering absolute, silent submission, not just to their king, but to the brilliant mind that had saved their lives. Kaelin dismounted his destrier. His bandaged chest ached, and he was exhausted. But as he walked over to Elara's horse, his steel-gray eyes burned with a fire that had nothing to do with war. He reached up, his large, calloused hands gently grasping her waist, and lifted her down from the saddle. He didn't let her go when her boots touched the ground. He stood before her, towering over her fragile frame, yet looking at her as if she were the tallest mountain in the north. "I expected a trade," Kaelin murmured, his rough voice meant only for her ears, completely ignoring the kneeling pack around them. "I expected a terrified hostage." Elara looked up at his scarred, brutally handsome face. Scent of crushed mint and frozen pine swelled between them. No longer a latent secret, but a roaring, undeniable truth that bound their souls together. "I expected a monster," Elara whispered, the last of her rigid emotional walls finally melting away. Kaelin reached down, gently taking her right hand. He looked at the silver ink permanently stained into her index finger. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King of the Winter Fangs bowed his head and pressed his lips to her ink-stained knuckles. "You handed me my kingdom today, Elara," Kaelin said softly, looking up into her hazel eyes with deep, anchoring reverence. "It is yours. I am yours." He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her, burying his face in her dark hair. Elara closed her eyes, resting her head against the steady, thumping heartbeat of the beast who had become her ultimate protector. She had been sold for 300 crates of iron. She had expected to be broken. Instead, she had balanced the ledger of fate, earning a crown, a pack, and an Alpha King who would burn the world to keep her warm. A crown can be stolen, but a kingdom is truly earned by ink, intellect, and blood. Did you love seeing Elara use her brilliant mind to outsmart her cruel father and claim the absolute devotion of the Alpha King? What was your favorite moment of her tactical genius? Us? If this story of a highly intelligent Luna, a deeply protective Alpha, and a dignity that could not be broken touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and come back for more emotional royal wolf romances. See you in the next story.